twowayradios.com? Check, check. By twowayradios.com?
It's the Two-Way Radio Show.
And welcome to the Two-Way Radio Show. I'm Rick Savoya.
And I'm Danny Feemster.
And this is the podcast about two-way radios for business and consumer communications. Today we discuss a recent clarification from the FCC on the rule about linking GMRS repeaters. We'll also take some of your comments and questions from our blog and our forum at twowayradios.com. Our show is sponsored by twowayradios.com, the source of two-way radios and radio accessories for businesses and consumers since 2002. twowayradios.com, your radio specialists. The topic of linking repeaters has been one of confusion and contention within the GMRS community. Some GMRS users claim that it violates the FCC rules. Proponents of these linked repeater systems argue that the rules are somewhat ambiguous and open to interpretation, allowing these linked systems to exist. Recently, the FCC stepped in and clarified the rule regarding GMRS repeater operation to settle the argument once and for all, and it did so in plain English. So what is the final word on this? Can GMRS repeaters be linked? Or is it against the rules? The more interesting question is, did the rule really need to be clarified in the first place?
Yeah, I think clearly the rule needed to be clarified in the first place, right? Because we have, there were a lot of linked repeater systems in using GMRS throughout the country. So whether people knew that it probably wasn't supposed to be allowed, or whether they were choosing to ignore the rules, or not, I think the FCC, if they did not want that, they probably should have came out and clarified what the rules meant. And I think that's what they're doing here.
Well,
kind of unusual for the FCC to come out and make a statement or clarify the rules. Mm-hmm. You really don't see that a lot.
Well, we could make the argument as to whether or not it really needed clarification, because I have my own thoughts on this. But I think what we need to do is take a step back first. And for those who are really not familiar with what's going on, let's define this a little bit. First of all, what are linked repeaters?
A lot of repeaters have a network card, basically, that lets you connect them to a internet or to a computer network, which would allow you to connect them to the internet and then link up with other repeaters using the internet instead of RF to get the radio signal from one repeater to another. So basically, a repeater in New York could be linked to a repeater in Chicago, and you can have two, basically the same communications in two cities, 1,500 miles apart, using the internet to transmit the voice between those two systems.
Well, ham radio repeaters are often linked together to create a repeater network, and this is legal under the FCC rules. I mean, they've been doing it for a long time, and they do it for a few reasons. Of course, it's usually recognized as a useful and a potentially vital function of ham radio for the purpose of forwarding messages or traffic to other ham radio operators, and especially during an emergency. The thing is, though, somehow along the way, GMRS operators picked this up and decided, let's adopt this for GMRS repeaters and create our own GMRS repeater networks, just like the ham radio community has.
Well, it makes sense that GMRS users would want to do this because this is powerful functionality. It allows you to extend the reach of your repeater. It allows you to connect to a larger community of people than you would be talking to perhaps just within, 30, 50 miles of the repeater that you have up. So it's a very powerful feature. And as people become advanced radio hobbyists that are introduced to radio perhaps through GMRS, it makes sense that this is a feature that they would want because it, like you said, it's prolific in the ham community. There's tons of repeater linking happening in the ham world. So I think that some groups were doing this. Maybe other groups are saying, oh, well, these other groups are doing it already, so it must be legal. And the rules are kind of, you can kind of see maybe they're vague. But I think with the FCC is working now to put a stop to this, in my opinion. They aren't finding anyone that, but maybe, nasty letters are the next step.
Well, the thing is, though, that even though they've adopted this from ham radio, the simple fact is that GMRS isn't ham radio. And so there are different rules that apply to the GMRS service that apply to ham radio. And, ham radio is, and we've talked about this before, but ham radio encompasses a number of different bands and frequencies. And you have that expanse to be able to put together repeater systems like this and link them together without really encroaching on, other frequencies and what other people are doing on the service for the most part. But GMRS doesn't have that luxury. I mean, GMRS is limited to only 8 repeater channels, and they're already getting pretty crowded. And once again, we've discussed this in previous episodes of the Two-Way Radio Show podcast. So to me, I think that linking repeater systems together to create these big networks actually exacerbates that problem. Don't you think?
Yeah, I agree with you there. 100%. I can see that adding a lot of traffic to a lot of nationwide, perhaps traffic to 8 GMRS frequencies, that could cause a problem. And that is causing a problem in some places, I'm sure. But I don't think that it's necessarily, it would be nice if linking could coexist with GMRS somehow, because I think GMRS is, you do see some advanced radio people in GMRS. There's a lot of people that are wanting to use GMRS for the right reasons, but there are some legitimate reasons that you might want to link a repeater. I wish the FCC could come to some compromise on this, perhaps. Like, I don't know what the solution would be. My idea would be to add more bandwidth to GMRS and maybe add another section of spectrum to put more channels in GMRS and maybe leave the rules as they are for the spectrum as it exists today, but add some new spectrum that would add some new capabilities, like maybe digital or maybe repeater linking on the new frequencies. And I don't know how they do that, because to get new spectrum, they're going to have to take it away from some other service.
Yeah, I think they're pretty crowded as it is right now. I don't know.
Easy for me to say this. Yeah, it's easy for me to say this, but it's not easy being the FCC and having to decide who to steal bandwidth from. No one's going to be happy with that.
Well, what it comes down to is, I mean, these GMRS repeaters have become more prolific, and as they've done so, this practice of linking repeaters has become more common, and it's created a lot of controversy and some serious debate among some of the GMRS users within the community. And some of them claim that, well, it outright violates the FCC rules for GMRS. And proponents, of course, those who support it, are saying that, hey, look, the rules are just too ambiguous and they're open to interpretation. So what the FCC did just very recently, they stepped in, and it took them long enough, but they stepped in and they updated their website to clarify the meaning of those rules, and they did it in plain English. And we're still looking at the reaction from the GMRS community over this. As some of those are for it, and some are against it. Some are kind of indifferent about it. But be that as it may, the FCC has stepped in, done the clarification, and the rules are the rules. That's the way things are.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they made it absolutely clear that they don't want repeater linking to happen. And I think they're at the point of clarification. And I think that if repeaters continue to be linked, you're probably going to see the FCC step up their enforcement action somewhat. Now, it's rare to see significant penalties come from them. So they'll it's just step one. They're going to hope everyone stops linking voluntarily. They're, in 6 months to a year, they'll probably look at it again and send a nasty letter to the repeaters that they find that are still linked.
Yeah.
And then they may start threatening fines and,
Well, I'll tell you what, for our own clarification here, and for the clarification of all of our listeners and viewers of the Two-Way Radio Show podcast, I'm going to go ahead and read this verbatim. It's not that long. It's a few paragraphs, but I think it's important to really understand what's going on here and how they clarified it. They even included an example, which I'm sure helps. And I think if no one really understands what's going on at that point, by the end of this, I think, I think you'll probably need to contact the FCC on your own and get that resolved. But
now, explain before you start reading this. Explain where you're getting this from, because they did not make any changes to the actual law.
No,
I think their position is the law always made repeater linking illegal, but this is something on the FCC's GMRS page of their website, correct?
Right. This is on the GMRS page of their website. You can just do a search for GMRS and it'll pop up that page. And I think there are 4 or 5 pages there, and each one has a tab. And this is under the tab for what is it now? I forgot what tab.
Operations.
Yeah, this is the tab for operations. Yeah. So we're going to preamble this with a GMRS licensee may use a combination of portable, mobile, fixed, and repeater stations consistent with the operational and technical rules in Subpart E of Part 95. Okay, good for starters. The use of some channels is restricted to certain types of stations. I think we're all aware of that. In addition, certain channels are reserved for voice-only operations, while other channels allow voice and limited data operations. And I think we've covered that in the past. None of the GMRS channels are assigned for the exclusive use of any system. And we discussed that in a fairly recent episode of the Two-Way Radio Show when we were talking about how much power repeater owners have over their repeaters and what you can't say and that sort of thing. Oh, I got a lot of flack for that one. I was really the bad guy on that one, even though I was just bringing it up. Okay, to continue, this is where we get into the actual meat and potatoes of this. Licensees must cooperate in the selection and use of the channels under a listen before talk etiquette in order to use them most effectively and to reduce the possibility of interference. A GMRS user can expect a communications range of 1 to 25 miles depending on station class, terrain, and repeater use. Now,
I think this is where it gets interesting.
Yes, this is where it gets very interesting. And it says here, GMRS stations cannot be interconnected with the public switch telephone network or any other network for the purpose of carrying GMRS communications, but these networks can be used for remote control of repeater stations. And this is where they provide an example here. In other words, repeaters may not be linked via the internet, an example of an other network in the rules to extend the range of the communications across a large geographic area. Linking multiple repeaters to enable a repeater outside the communications range of the handheld or mobile device to retransmit messages violates sections 95.1733A8 and 95.1749 of the Commission's rules, and potentially other rules in 47 CFR. Repeaters may be connected to the telephone network or other networks only for the purposes of remote control of a GMRS station, not for carrying communication signals. In addition to violating Commission rules, linking repeaters is not in the public interest. And this is where they get into their reasoning for this, and I think it makes perfect sense. And we've already discussed this, really. Because GMRS spectrum is limited and used on a shared commons basis, the service only works well on a localized basis when users can hear each other and cooperate in the sharing of channels. Linking repeaters not only increases the potential for interference, but also uses up a limited spectrum resource over much larger areas than intended, limiting localized availability of the repeater channels. GMRS and the Family Radio Service, FRS, which share many of the GMRS channels, are intended for individuals such as family members and friends, scouting troops, emergency response groups, and hobbyists to communicate with each other over short distances, directly or through a repeater station. Linking repeaters via the internet or other networks undermines the purpose and usefulness of the GMRS and FRS. And there you go. And why didn't I mention FRS here? Because they're using the same frequencies and channels. And this it not only interferes with GMRS, but interferes with FRS. So, that's, I think that
you
doesn't need to be said.
You could get into some nuance here. Like, for example, if you've got a repeater in Chicago, using my example from before, whether that repeater is linked to a different repeater or not, it still covers a certain area when it transmits. So it's not like stopping this is going to allow more repeaters to use more repeaters, because the repeaters that exist take up a certain amount of geographic area with the signal that they're putting out.
Yeah.
So whether they're transmitting 90% of the time or 5% of the time, the fact that they're there now sort of prohibits another GMRS repeater from coming in and using that same channel, right? So that channel is blocked for other repeater use, regardless of whether it's linked over the internet. Does that nuance make a difference to you?
Well, yeah, there's some nuance there. Here's the thing. It comes right back down to the original question here as to whether or not it was open to interpretation or not, which I don't think it was. I mean, when I looked at the rules and it said any other network in the rules, to me, that means any other network, period. And what's a network? What's the definition of a network? Definition of a network is where you have two or more devices or things getting together and creating some sort of a symbiotic connection or a relationship where data or voice or whatever is shared.
Anyone is going to think of the internet when you say you can't network these repeaters together. That's the first thing you would think of, to network two repeaters anyway, right?
But that's not the only definition of a network.
Oh, I understand, but it's the big one in this scenario, and it's would obviously be what they were referring to with other network. But the way the language was in there with the other network, it was sort of there was one sentence that said it's prohibited on the public switch network, period. And then there was another sentence that said, oh, you can use the public network, or you can use the phone network or the internet or any other network, is what it says, for remote control only.
Yeah, only. So there are two key words here. There's the key word of any other network. I think any other, it doesn't say any other network except this one or except that one or except this type of network. It just said any other network. That's kind of cut and dry. It's period. And the thing is
in that first sentence, then if you have the first sentence that says you're prohibited from using GMRS repeaters on a public switch network, period. Why not say in that sentence you're prohibited from using it on the public switch network or the internet or any other network?
Who knows? I don't write up these FCC. I'm not the
agree. I'm not a
stenographer for
lawyer
the
either.
FCC, so I have no idea.
I'm not either, but I'm saying if someone's looking to find some wiggle room,
Yeah.
they could have probably found some wiggle room.
Well,
I got another question for you though. It makes it pretty clear now reading this clarification. But what about when we think about linked repeaters, we usually think about for transmitting purposes, like you're receiving on one repeater, you're sending that voice over the internet to another repeater, which then transmits it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if you're going receive only, sort of like you've got a repeater connected to the internet and you're sending the voice to a server to be stored as a voice file over the internet, just for recording purposes?
Mm-hmm.
What if you're there's also these Zello services where you could, in effect, have all of your communications that come in through the repeater rebroadcasted out on an internet channel that's sort of receive only. The clarification that I'm reading here seems to prohibit that. And I don't think it makes sense to prohibit transmitting voice over the internet for the purpose of storage or receive only rebroadcast.
Yeah,
you know
but then
I mean?
again, we get into broadcasting because because that is a clear rule about broadcasting. You're not supposed to broadcast anything over GMRS.
No, you're not broadcasting over GMRS. You're using your GMRS repeater the way you normally would, but you're also, the repeater's connected to the internet, and whatever comes to the repeater is also being sent out on a Zello channel, or it's also being saved as an MP3 on a server somewhere.
I think that gets into some other sticky areas too. Then you get into, well, we could go into.
It's not cut and dry though, is it? You read the rules, and
I think that any other network covers that too. But
I agree.
You brought up something that I think is very intriguing. You brought up something, and I've seen this happen on a lot of ham videos and things like that. What happens when you're storing that as an MP3 or rebroadcasting it somewhere else? Is that possibly a violation of, wiretap laws?
I wouldn't think so, because anyone that's talking on a public repeater expects their transmission to be public. If you're talking into a GMRS radio, you can't complain that other people hear you.
No, but if you're recording it to retransmit it out over some other place that maybe that person was unaware was being done or did not really want being done, I think that's kind of a sticky area too, isn't it?
It seems to me like if you put it out there, you got to be, what happens, happens. You lose a lot of control when you put something on the public airwaves. Right?
Perhaps. And we're getting in some really deep weeds here, but I just thought I'd bring it up just because it just occurred to me for some reason. It just.
I think the most interesting thing is that the clarification of the rules by the FCC seems to me to say this transmission can never go over the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And it should be even more clear than that, because there are some cases where it should be fine to send GMRS traffic over the internet. For example, if rebroadcasting it on a Zello channel or saving those voice files to an Amazon AWS server somewhere, there should be nothing wrong with that. And I don't think the FCC intends to prohibit that. But the only way we're going to know is if somebody does it and the FCC never goes after them.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and you see a lot of scanner websites that have that are basically monitoring police communication, or police repeaters, right? That are rebroadcasting those repeater signals out on online. It's sort of like that, right? You should be able to do that with GMRS.
Mm-hmm. Just be careful what you say out on the public airwaves. What you say may be used against you somewhere in some way, recorded, saved somewhere, brought back up later. I'm just saying.
anyone should have been aware of that way before this
true.
FCC clarification.
That's true. That's true. All right. So overall, what do you think of this? Do you think is it clarified enough, and even more so? Is this something that's going to cause even more contention and more, I don't know, dissatisfaction in the community?
I gotta be honest. My first reaction was like, "Oh my God, what's the FCC doing now? Is this really necessary? Why are we doing this? It's stupid." But when I stepped back and thought about it for a while, it does make sense because we have a limited number of channels, so I can see the reason that they're doing it, and it kind of makes sense. It's unfortunate because I want hobbyists in GMRS to be able to do all of these things. I want people to be able to link repeaters. It expands GMRS. It makes it more useful. It makes it something you're going to want to tell your friends about.
And I want the ones who are not hobbyists to be able to enjoy their radios and be able to communicate with one another without having to worry about whether or not they're getting through to the other side because of all the congestion on those, caused by those repeater networks. And bottom line is, I think what we really need to settle the issue overall is we need more GMRS channels, and in particular, repeater channels. That's what I think.
I agree. Now, I kind of disagree with you because, and I'm mainly in the Charlotte area, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not across the country. I'm sure this is different in some areas, but when I use a GMRS radio and I put it on scan, I don't hear constant chatter on every channel. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem like there's anywhere near massive congestion on this service. Now, I know we could be headed. Repeater sales have gone up a lot over the last few years. The number of GMRS repeaters is up significantly, we could end up in a place where we have a lot of congestion, but I don't think we're there now. I mean, if you turn on your radio, do you really have trouble finding a clear channel to talk to your family on? I don't think you do.
Not where I am, really, but
you're in the middle of Charlotte. That's a big metro area.
Well, I'm not in the middle of it. I'm on the edge. I'm not far away from it as I'd like to be.
You're more and more in the middle as the years go on.
Unfortunately, yes, it's all building up around me, and I wouldn't mind being a little farther away. Maybe Charlotte can move a little farther away from me, but I don't think that's going to happen. But
I think that eventually, maybe a decade down the road, we may be talking about more congestion on FRS and GMRS. And I know it takes the FCC a long time to move on these things. And so I don't think that we have an issue right now with congestion on FRS and GMRS. But I do think that the FCC moves glacially slow. I mean, if it's something where in a decade we're going to need an answer because of all the congestion that's going to happen, then they need to be thinking now about how to get more bandwidth allocated to GMRS. And I hope there's someone there thinking about that. We should be encouraging them to think about that because things like more channels, digital support, maybe a few channels that specifically authorize repeater linking would be a good thing to have.
Well, I agree with that. I concur with that.
Maybe we can have it all.
Yeah, I think you summarized it pretty well overall. All right. Well, any other thoughts on the linking of GMRS repeaters and the FCC's clarification of that rule?
I have lots of thoughts, Rick, but I think I got most of them out.
Oh,
as soon as we finish, I'll think, I should have said this.
Save it for the next episode. I'm sure we'll have a lot of comments coming in for the next one on this one. All right. Well, we have some comments and questions from our blog and our forum at twowayradiosforum.com. The first one comes from John, and John wants to know, is the T200 series compatible with the T600 series frequencies? I'm wanting to use the T600 to talk with a user who has a T260. Thank you. And that's from John. And I believe he's referring to the Motorola Talkabout series, T200 and T600 radios. The short answer is, go ahead.
Absolutely. They are compatible. If it says Talkabout, it will talk to any other Talkabout radio ever made.
All right. Our next one comes from Micah, and Micah wants to know, my workplace uses Moto CLS 1413 and purchased Cobra PX650 because the Cobra customer service said they would be compatible. However, as far as I can tell from the frequency tables in the manuals, none of the channels are compatible. Am I missing something, or are they really not compatible? And that's from Micah. And that Motorola CLS 1413, that's a business radio, and that's actually one I believe that's sold in Canada, a version of it. We sell the ones, the CLS 1410s. The 1413 is a Canadian version, but I think it uses pretty much the same business frequencies. The Cobra, I believe, is an FRS radio, is it not?
Yeah, it is. The Cobra customer service rep probably doesn't really know much about radios and saw, oh, this is a business radio, that's a business radio. But what Cobra has is an FRS radio that they market to businesses, which is fine. You can use FRS if you're a business, but it's not going to talk to a Motorola business radio because those use business exclusive frequencies.
All right, and our last one here comes from Mr. Steve, and Mr. Steve says, I have my KG XS20G programmed with the channels I want, but now I have a new repeater channel that I want to add to it. I would like to insert this repeater channel between the existing channels that I already have programmed. An example is I want to add the new channel in between line 23 and 24. So I would add the channel to line 24 and all channels below that would drop down one line. I can't seem to find a way to do this. Is there a way to insert a channel? I am using the programming software from my radio that I downloaded from the KG XS20G page. Thank you for your help, and that's from Mr. Steve.
I don't believe there's an easy way to do that through the XS20G software. We do, as Ocean has updated their software with their more recent models, it is much better and much more user-friendly. It's like, for example, the Q series software for the Q10G and Q10H has an import-export feature. So you could export all of your channels to Excel, make any changes you want using Excel, and then import that back into the channel grid. But unfortunately, they've solved the problem, but not with the older models.
All right. Well, I guess that does it for our comments and questions in this episode. Send in your comments and questions for Danny or myself to show@bytwowayradios.com. If you want to know more about today's topic or about two-way radios in general, check out our forum discussions at twowayradiosforum.com. You can subscribe to the Two-Way Radio Show directly from our website at twowayradioshow.com, or hear it wherever you can find a podcast. And you can also subscribe by email. If you want to do it the easy way, just do it by email. Click the subscribe by email button on the Two-Way Radio Show podcast page at twowayradioshow.com, enter your email address, and you'll get the latest episode of the Two-Way Radio Show as soon as it's released. All right, well, I guess that does it for our show in this episode. Before we go, any final comment?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, today's show is sponsored by twowayradios.com. Whether you're searching for two-way radios for general consumer or business use, Buy Two-Way Radios can help you find the best solution for your needs. Enter the promo code SHOW at checkout and save an additional 5% off your order. Give us a call at 1-800-584-1445 or enter our live chat at buytwowayradios.com. Well, everyone, as always, thanks for listening. And until next time, for the Two-Way Radio Show, I'm Rick Savoya.
And I'm Danny Feemster.
And we're out.